The dusty platform stood beneath the relentless Arizona sun, as Olivia Thompson felt her legs tremble, knowing her life was about to change forever whether she wanted it to or not. She stood among a line of other women, all wearing their best dresses despite the circumstances that had brought them here. The year was 1876, and Kennewick had become one of those rough mining towns where men outnumbered women 10 to 1. The auction was advertised as a bride lottery, but everyone knew what it really meant. Women with nowhere else to go, sold to the highest bidder under the guise of matrimony and respectability. Olivia's hands shook as she clutched a small carpet bag containing everything she owned. Her auburn hair had been pinned up carefully that morning by one of the other women, and her green dress, though faded, had been brushed clean of trail dust. She was 20 years old, though sometimes she felt ancient. The wagon train that brought her west had fallen apart in New Mexico when the guide died of fever and half the families turned back. With no money for passage home to Missouri and no family waiting for her anyway, she had drifted into Arizona with a group of similarly desperate women. The auctioneer was a portly man with sweat stains spreading across his vest. He cleared his throat importantly as a crowd of men gathered around the platform. Cowboys, miners, shopkeepers, and drifters all pushed forward, examining the merchandise with varying degrees of courtesy. Some men looked embarrassed to be there. Others leered openly. "Gentlemen, gentlemen," the auctioneer called out, his voice carrying across the dusty street. "Each of these fine ladies has agreed to marry the man who makes the winning bid. All legal and proper, with Reverend Walsh here to perform the ceremonies immediately following." Olivia could see the Reverend standing in the shade, looking deeply uncomfortable with the whole arrangement but apparently willing to lend it legitimacy nonetheless. Her stomach churned. She had known hunger and cold and fear before, but this felt different. This felt like selling the last piece of herself that still belonged to her alone. The first woman was called forward. She was older, perhaps 35, with kind eyes and work-roughened hands. The bidding was brief but respectful, and a blacksmith with gentle manners won her for $40 and a promise of a small house. The woman looked relieved as she stepped down. The second woman went for less, the third for more. Olivia tried not to listen to the amounts, tried not to think about being reduced to a price, a commodity, a solution to loneliness that could be bought with coin. Then it was her turn. "Next we have Miss Olivia Thompson," the auctioneer announced. 20 years old, healthy, and willing to make a fine wife for the right man. Olivia stepped forward, forcing herself to keep her chin up. She scanned the crowd, trying not to see individuals, just a blur of faces. But one man caught her attention despite her efforts. He stood near the back, taller than most, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes so blue they were visible even from a distance. He wore typical cowboy clothing, all worn and dusty from work, with a bandana around his neck and a hat in his hands. Unlike the others, he was not pushing forward or calling out. He just watched her with an expression she could not quite read. "Let's start the bidding at $20, the auctioneer called. "20, someone shouted immediately. "25, 30. Olivia's heart hammered in her chest as the numbers climbed. She caught glimpses of the men bidding. One had cruel eyes and whiskey on his breath even at this hour. Another looked old enough to be her grandfather. A third kept grinning in a way that made her skin crawl. 35. The drunk man shouted. There was a pause. Olivia felt terror rising in her throat. "Not him. Please, not him." 35 going once, the auctioneer called out. The tall cowboy in the back shifted his weight. His jaw tightened. 35 going twice, $50. The new voice was deep and quiet, but it carried. The tall cowboy had spoken, and the crowd turned to look at him. Olivia stared. $50 was more than anyone had bid for any of the women so far. The drunk man scowled. 55. 75, the cowboy said calmly, his blue eyes never leaving Olivia's face. The crowd murmured. That was serious money, especially for a cowboy. The drunk man started to speak again, but someone next to him grabbed his arm and whispered urgently in his ear. Whatever was said made the drunk back down, though he spat in the dust with disgust. 75 going once, going twice, sold. The auctioneer's gavel came down. The young lady goes to Brett Sawyer. Brett Sawyer. Olivia repeated the name silently as she stepped down from the platform on shaking legs. The cowboy moved through the crowd toward her, and as he approached, she could see him more clearly. He was perhaps 25, with sun-bronzed skin and calluses on his hands that spoke of hard work. His face was handsome in a rugged way, with a strong jaw and those startling blue eyes, but it was the uncertainty in his expression that surprised her most. He looked almost as nervous as she felt. "Madam," he said quietly when he reached her, nodding respectfully. "I'm Brett." "Olivia," she managed to say. "I know this isn't. I mean I." He stopped, seeming to struggle for words. "I have a small ranch about 5 miles out. It's not much, but it's honest work. I promise I'll treat you respectfully." Before Olivia could respond, the Reverend was calling them over. 2 more couples were married first, quick ceremonies with stumbling vows and awkward kisses. Then it was their turn. Olivia stood beside Brett, very aware of his height and the warmth radiating from him in the afternoon sun. The Reverend recited the familiar words, and she found herself repeating vows in a voice that sounded far away. "Do you, Brett Sawyer, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," Brett said firmly. "And do you, Olivia Thompson, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Olivia hesitated for only a heartbeat. "I do." "Then, by the power vested in me, I pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss your bride." Brett's eyes met hers, asking silent permission. Olivia gave the smallest nod, and he leaned down to press a brief, gentle kiss to her lips. It was over in a moment, but something fluttered in her chest at the unexpected tenderness. Within the hour, she found herself sitting beside Brett in a wagon, rolling out of Kennewick toward a future she could not imagine. Her small carpetbag sat at her feet, and Brett's horse was tied to the back of the wagon. They rode in silence for a long while, the wheels creaking and the landscape stretching out in shades of brown and gold. "I should tell you something," Olivia finally said, her voice quiet. Brett glanced at her. "What's that?" "I can't read." The shame colored her cheeks. "I never learned. My family was poor and there wasn't any school near where we lived. I can write my name, but that's all." She waited for disappointment or mockery, but Brett just nodded thoughtfully. "Well, I can read," he said. "I could teach you if you wanted to learn." Olivia turned to stare at him. "You would do that? Sure, I have some books at the ranch, not many but a few, and an old primer that belonged to my mother." He paused. "Would you want to learn?" "Yes," Olivia breathed. "I've always wanted to know how." Something in Brett's expression softened. "Then I'll teach you. We can start tonight if you'd like." They fell back into silence, but it felt less awkward now. Olivia studied the landscape, so different from Missouri. Arizona was harsh and beautiful, with mesas rising in the distance and scrub brush clinging to red earth. Hawks circled overhead, and she spotted jackrabbits darting between the sparse vegetation. "Tell me about your ranch," she said eventually. Brett seemed grateful for the question. "It's small. About 300 acres with a creek running through the eastern section. I have maybe 50 head of cattle right now, and I'm building the herd slowly. There's a cabin, 2 rooms, and I've been working on a barn. It's not fancy." "I'm not looking for fancy," Olivia said honestly. "I'm just looking for stability, I suppose, safety." You'll have both, Brett promised. I won't hurt you, Olivia. I know you don't know me and you have no reason to trust me yet, but I swear I'll never raise a hand to you. The intensity in his voice made her believe him. Why did you bid on me? She asked. You didn't seem like the others, pushing forward, eager. Brett was quiet for a long moment, his hands steady on the reins. I've been alone for 3 years, he said finally. My parents died in an outbreak of typhoid when I was 22. They had a small farm in Texas, but I wanted something different, so I came out here and started over. The work is good, but the loneliness. He trailed off. I heard about the auction and told myself I wasn't going to go. Seemed wrong somehow, buying a wife, but I went anyway just to see. And then you stepped up on that platform. What about me? Olivia asked. You looked scared but brave, Brett said. You kept your chin up. And when that drunk started bidding, I saw your face. I couldn't let you go to someone like that. Olivia's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. Thank you, she whispered. They reached the ranch as the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. Olivia's first impression was of a place cared for but clearly maintained by someone working alone. The cabin was sturdy, built of wood with a stone chimney. The barn Brett mentioned was half-finished, the frame standing like a skeleton against the sky. There was a small corral with 2 horses besides the one Brett had brought, and she could see cattle grazing in the distance. Home, Brett said, a hint of uncertainty in his voice as if worried she might find it lacking. It's lovely, Olivia said, and she meant it. There was something honest about the place, something real. Brett helped her down from the wagon, his hands careful on her waist. I'll show you inside. The cabin's main room served as kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and shelves holding dishes and supplies. Everything was neat but sparse. A rocking chair sat near the fireplace, and Olivia could imagine Brett sitting there on cold evenings. Through an open door, she could see a bedroom with a simple bed covered in a patchwork quilt. There's a second room, Brett said quickly, gesturing to another door. It's small, more of a storage room right now, but I can move things out and put a bed in there. You can have the bedroom and I'll sleep in the smaller room. I don't expect. I mean, just because we're married doesn't mean. Thank you, Olivia said softly, understanding what he was trying to say. That's kind of you. Brett nodded, looking relieved. Are you hungry? I can make something. I'm not a great cook, but I won't starve you. I can cook, Olivia offered, if you show me what you have. They worked together to prepare a simple meal of beans, bacon, and cornbread. Brett moved around his kitchen with practiced efficiency, and Olivia found herself relaxing slightly as they fell into an easy rhythm. He showed her where things were kept, and she found his supplies well organized. There was coffee, flour, beans, rice, some dried beef, a little sugar, and even a small tin of honey. As they ate, Brett asked about her life before the auction. Olivia found herself talking about growing up in Missouri, about her mother dying when she was 12, and her father drinking himself to death 3 years later. She told him about living with an aunt who barely tolerated her, about the promise of a fresh start in California that had lured her onto the wagon train, about how everything had fallen apart. Brett listened without interrupting, his blue eyes attentive. That's a lot of loss, he said when she finished. I'm sorry you've had such a hard time of it. We've both lost people, Olivia said. At least you have this place, something you've built. We have this place now, Brett corrected gently. After dinner, Brett cleared the table while Olivia washed the dishes in a basin. The domesticity of it felt strange but not unpleasant. When everything was clean, Brett disappeared into the bedroom and returned with a worn book and an even more worn primer. My mother taught me to read when I was young, he said. settling into one of the chairs and gesturing for Olivia to take the other. She believed education was important, even out on the frontier. This primer is basic, but it's a good place to start. Olivia sat down, her hands trembling slightly with nervousness and excitement. Brett opened the primer to the first page, which showed the alphabet in careful print. "You know your letters at all?" he asked. "Some of them," Olivia admitted. "I've seen them enough to recognize a few, but I don't know what sounds they all make." "Then we will start at the very beginning," Brett said. He pointed to the first letter. "This is A. It makes a sound like the in apple." They worked through the alphabet slowly, Brett's voice patient as he repeated sounds and helped her practice. His finger traced each letter as he spoke, and Olivia found herself leaning closer to see better. She could smell wood smoke and leather, and something clean that was just him. "Now you try," Brett said, pushing the book toward her. "Point to the letters and tell me what sounds they make." Olivia's finger shook as she pointed to the first letter. "A," she said hesitantly. "Good. And the sound, like apple," she said, remembering. They went through the whole alphabet 3 times before Brett decided that was enough for one night. "Your brain needs time to rest and remember," he explained. "We'll practice every night, and before you know it, you'll be reading full sentences." "I hope so," Olivia said. She felt exhausted but also exhilarated. For the first time in years, she felt like she was moving forward instead of just surviving. Brett showed her the bedroom where he had turned down the quilt on the bed. "I'll be in the other room if you need anything," he said. "Sleep well, Olivia." "Good night, Brett," she said softly. She changed into her nightgown once he had closed the door and slipped between the sheets. The bed was more comfortable than she had expected, and she could hear Brett moving around in the other room, settling in for the night. Exhaustion pulled at her, but her mind kept turning over the events of the day. This morning she had stood on an auction block, terrified and alone. Tonight she lay in a real bed in a real home, married to a man who seemed determined to treat her with kindness. It was not love. Not yet. But maybe it could become something real. The days fell into a pattern. Olivia woke early and made breakfast while Brett did the morning chores. They ate together, and then Brett would head out to work on the ranch while Olivia tackled the endless domestic tasks. There was always something to do. Laundry in a large tub out back, mending clothes, cleaning, preparing meals, tending a small vegetable garden behind the cabin that had been somewhat neglected. Brett was gone most of the day, working with the cattle, riding fence lines, finishing the barn. He would return in the evening, dusty and tired, and Olivia would have dinner waiting. After they ate, they would sit at the table, and Brett would teach her to read. Those evening lessons became the highlight of Olivia's days. Brett was a patient teacher, never making her feel stupid when she struggled with a sound or forgot a letter. They moved from individual letters to simple words: cat, dog, run, son. Olivia practiced writing them on a slate Brett had found, her letters awkward at first but growing more confident. "You're doing really well," Brett told her one evening, about 2 weeks after their wedding. "Look at how far you have come already." Olivia looked at the slate where she had written several simple sentences. She could read them now, actually read them without Brett's help. Pride swelled in her chest. "I never thought I could actually do this," she admitted. "You're smart," Brett said simply. "You just never had the chance before." As the weeks passed, Olivia found herself watching Brett more closely. She noticed the careful way he moved around her, always respectful of her space. She saw how hard he worked, how he was trying to build something lasting. She heard the loneliness in his voice sometimes when he talked about his parents or the future he hoped for. They were becoming friends, she realized. They talked easily now, sharing stories and small jokes. Brett told her about working cattle drives before saving enough to buy his land. Olivia told him about the time she tried to bake bread as a girl and nearly burned her aunt's kitchen down. They laughed together, and the sound was warm in the small cabin. One evening, about a month after their wedding, a storm rolled in. Olivia was preparing dinner when she heard the first rumble of thunder. She glanced out the window and saw dark clouds building on the horizon. Brett came in earlier than usual, his expression concerned. "There's a storm coming," he said. "A big one by the look of it. We need to make sure everything is secured." They worked together, bringing in tools and supplies, making sure the animals had access to shelter. The wind picked up, whipping Olivia's skirts around her legs as she helped Brett close the barn doors. By the time they got back to the cabin, the first fat raindrops were falling. The storm hit with the fury that only desert storms can bring. Rain pounded the roof, and lightning split the sky. Thunder rattled the windows. Olivia found herself jumping at each crash, her heart racing. "It's all right," Brett said, noticing her fear. "The cabin's sturdy. We're safe." But when a particularly loud crack of thunder shook the walls, Olivia couldn't help the small cry that escaped her lips. Brett moved closer, his hand hovering near her shoulder but not quite touching. "Are storms always this frightening for you?" "When I was little, a tornado came through near where we lived," Olivia explained, her voice shaky. "It destroyed 3 farms and killed 2 people. I've been scared of bad storms ever since." "Come here," Brett said gently. He opened his arms, offering comfort but leaving the choice to her. Olivia hesitated for only a moment before stepping into his embrace. Brett's arms came around her carefully, holding her against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong, and gradually her fear began to ease. They stood like that for a long time, Brett's hand rubbing slow circles on her back while the storm raged outside. "Better?" he asked softly when the thunder began to move away. Olivia nodded against his chest. But she didn't step back, and Brett didn't let go. Something had shifted between them in those moments. When Olivia finally pulled back enough to look up at him, she saw something new in his blue eyes, something warm and deep that made her breath catch. "Olivia," Brett said quietly, "I need to tell you something." "What?" she whispered. "I know this started as just a practical arrangement," he said, "but you've become more to me than just someone to help with the cooking and cleaning. I look forward to coming home because you're here. I think about you during the day, wondering what you're doing, hoping you're happy. And these evenings teaching you to read, they've become my favorite part of every day." Olivia's heart was pounding again, but not from fear this time. "Brett, You don't have to say anything," he said quickly. "I just wanted you to know. I'm falling for you, Olivia. Maybe I've been falling since I first saw you on that platform. I won't push you for anything you're not ready to give, but I wanted to be honest about my feelings." "I'm falling for you too," Olivia heard herself say. The truth of it washed over her as she spoke. "You've shown me such kindness. You've given me hope for the first time in years. When you come home in the evenings, I feel happy. When you sit close to me during lessons, my heart beats faster. I didn't want to admit it because I was scared, but I care about you, Brett. I care about you so much." Brett's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing gently across her skin. "Can I kiss you?" he asked. "Really kiss you, not like at the wedding?" "Yes," Olivia breathed. Brett lowered his head slowly, giving her time to change her mind. When his lips met hers, it was soft at first, questioning. But when Olivia's arms came up around his neck, the kiss deepened. Brett pulled her closer, and Olivia felt warmth spreading through her entire body. This was nothing like the brief peck at their wedding. This was real and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Brett rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this right," he said. "I want to court you properly, even though we're already married. I want you to be sure about me, about us. I'm sure, Olivia said, but she understood what he meant. There was a difference between legal marriage and the joining of hearts. But I'd like being courted. I never had that before. From that night forward, things changed between them in beautiful ways. Brett started bringing her small gifts, wildflowers picked on his rides, a pretty stone from the creek, a ribbon from town when he went for supplies. Olivia made his favorite foods and left him little notes, simple messages she could now write herself thanks to his teaching. Their reading lessons continued, but now they sat closer together, Brett's arm often around Olivia's shoulders. She progressed from the primer to an actual book, sounding out words slowly while Brett helped with the difficult ones. The first time she read an entire page without help, Brett kissed her in celebration, and Olivia laughed with pure joy. 2 months after their wedding, Brett took Olivia to town for the first time since the auction. She dressed carefully in her best dress, and Brett helped her into the wagon with extra care. As they rode into Kennewick, Olivia felt nervous. She remembered standing on that platform, remembered the stares and the crude comments. "You're with me now," Brett said, as if reading her thoughts. "You're my wife, and anyone who disrespects you will answer to me." The town looked different now that she was not for sale. They stopped first at the general store, where Brett introduced her to the owner, a balding man named Mr. Patterson. "Mrs. Sawyer," the man said with a respectful nod. "Welcome. What can I help you folks with today, Mrs. Sawyer?" The name still felt strange but also right. Olivia followed Brett through the store as he gathered supplies, but then he stopped in front of a shelf of books. "Pick one," he said to Olivia, "any one you want." Olivia stared at the books, her heart swelling. Really, you're reading well enough now for a real book. Choose something you'll enjoy." Olivia's fingers traced the spines reverently. She picked a book of poetry, its cover slightly worn but beautiful. "This one," she said softly. Brett smiled and added it to their purchases. They spent the rest of the morning in town, and Olivia met several other people. The blacksmith who had won one of the other women from the auction, now apparently happily married. A kind older woman who ran the boarding house. The new school teacher, a young woman from Boston who seemed overwhelmed by frontier life. On the ride home, Olivia clutched her book of poetry and felt something very close to happiness. Brett reached over and took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "Thank you for today," she said. "For what? I should be thanking you. You make me happier than I've been in years." That night, after dinner and after their reading lesson, when they stood to go to their separate rooms as had become their habit, Olivia stopped Brett with a hand on his arm. "I don't want to sleep alone anymore," she said quietly. "I want to be your wife in truth if you still want me." Brett's eyes darkened with emotion. "Are you sure?" "I'm very sure," Olivia said. She reached up to touch his face. "I love you, Brett. I didn't think I could ever feel this way, but I do. I love you." "I love you too," Brett said, his voice rough with feeling. "I've loved you for weeks now. I was just waiting for you to be ready." He swept her into his arms, kissing her deeply, and Olivia felt like her heart might burst with happiness. Brett carried her to the bedroom, their bedroom now, and closed the door behind them. That night, they became husband and wife in every sense, and Olivia discovered that love could be both tender and passionate, both gentle and consuming. The seasons changed, and life on the ranch found its rhythm. Olivia's reading improved until she could work through her poetry book with ease. Brett brought her more books from town, novels, histories, even a cookbook. She devoured them all, sometimes reading aloud to Brett in the evenings while he worked on mending tack or carved small wooden figures as a hobby. The ranch prospered. Brett's herd grew, and he hired a young cowhand named Tommy to help with the work. Olivia tended her expanding garden and even started raising chickens. They talked about the future, about building a bigger house someday, about the children they hoped to have. One morning in early spring, about 8 months after their wedding, Olivia woke feeling queasy. She barely made it outside before losing her breakfast. Brett found her pale and shaking, sitting on the back step. "Are you all right?" he asked, kneeling beside her with concern. "I think I might be pregnant," Olivia said, and watched Brett's face transform with joy. "Really? Are you sure?" "Not completely, but I'm late and I've been feeling sick in the mornings." She smiled up at him. "How do you feel about becoming a father?" Brett pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of glass. "I feel like the luckiest man alive," he said. "We're going to have a baby, our baby." They rode to town the next week to see the doctor, who confirmed what Olivia already suspected. She was pregnant, due in the fall. Brett walked around grinning like a fool for days, and Olivia found herself touching her still flat stomach in wonder, imagining the life growing inside her. As her pregnancy progressed, Brett became even more protective. He insisted she not overwork herself, taking on more of the household tasks himself when he came in from the fields. Olivia found it endearing, even when it was a little excessive. "I'm pregnant, not fragile," she reminded him one evening when he tried to stop her from hanging laundry. "I know," Brett said. "I just want to take care of you. You're carrying our child, Olivia. You're precious to me." The baby arrived on a cool October evening. Brett rode hard to fetch the doctor and the midwife while Olivia labored at home. It was long and difficult, but when she finally heard her baby's first cry, every moment of pain was forgotten. "It's a boy," the midwife announced, placing the squalling infant in Olivia's arms. "A healthy baby boy." Brett, who had been pacing outside per the midwife's orders, burst through the door. He stopped short at the sight of Olivia holding their son, his eyes filling with tears. "Is he all right? Are you all right?" "We're both fine," Olivia said, exhausted but radiant. "Come meet your son." Brett approached slowly, as if in a daze. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the tiny, red-faced baby. "He's perfect," Brett whispered. "He's absolutely perfect." They named him Benjamin Thomas Sawyer, Benjamin for Brett's father and Thomas for Olivia's. Little Ben had his father's blue eyes and his mother's auburn hair, and from the moment of his birth, he owned both their hearts completely. Life with a baby was exhausting but wonderful. Ben was colicky for the first few months, crying through many nights while Brett and Olivia took turns walking him around the cabin. But he eventually settled, becoming a happy baby who smiled easily and laughed at everything. Olivia often read to Ben, even though he was too young to understand. She wanted him surrounded by words, by knowledge, by all the things she had been denied as a child. Brett would come in from work to find her sitting in the rocking chair, Ben in her arms, reading aloud from one of her books. "He's going to be smart like his mother," Brett said one evening, leaning down to kiss first Olivia, then Ben's forehead. "And strong like his father," Olivia countered. As Ben grew from baby to toddler, the ranch continued to thrive. Brett hired another hand and they expanded the herd again. They built an addition onto the cabin, adding 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Olivia planted fruit trees and expanded her garden. The place was becoming more than just a ranch, it was becoming a real home. On their second anniversary, Brett surprised Olivia with a gift, a beautiful leather-bound journal and a set of good pens. "I thought you might want to write," he said. "You've learned to read so well. Maybe you'd like to write too, your own thoughts or stories or whatever you want." Olivia was speechless. She opened the journal, running her fingers over the blank pages. "This is the most thoughtful gift anyone has ever given me," she said, tears in her eyes. That night, after Ben was asleep and Brett was sitting by the fire, Olivia made her first journal entry. She wrote about standing on the auction block 3 years ago, terrified and ashamed. She wrote about Brett's blue eyes and his $50 bid. She wrote about learning to read at that very table, about falling in love, about the birth of their son. She wrote until her hand cramped, pouring years of unspoken thoughts onto the page. She began to write every night, documenting their life. She wrote about the funny things Ben did, about the challenges of ranch life, about her deep love for her husband. Sometimes she wrote poetry, clumsy attempts at first but gradually improving. Brett read her words when she let him, always careful to respect her privacy otherwise. "You have a gift," he told her after reading a particularly moving piece about watching the sunset over the ranch. "Your words paint pictures." The years continued to unfold. Ben grew into a bright, energetic boy who followed his father everywhere, chattering constantly and asking endless questions. When he was 4, Olivia discovered she was pregnant again. This time she carried the baby with more confidence, knowing what to expect. Their daughter arrived in spring, an easier birth than Ben had been. They named her Emma Marie, and she was the image of Olivia with red curls and green eyes. Ben was initially disappointed to have a sister instead of a brother, but quickly became fiercely protective of baby Emma. The ranch had grown into a successful operation. Brett now employed 4 cowhands, and they had over 200 head of cattle. They had built a proper barn, a bunkhouse for the hands, and expanded the main house again. Olivia's garden had become almost a small farm in itself, producing vegetables, fruits, and herbs that she sold in town. Life was not without challenges. There were dry years when water was scarce, and they worried about the cattle. There was a fever that swept through the region when Ben was 6, and they quarantined themselves at the ranch for weeks, terrified for their children. There were the normal struggles of any marriage, disagreements and hard conversations, but they always worked through them. Through it all, Brett and Olivia's love deepened. They knew each other's moods and thoughts, could communicate with a glance across the room. They still read together in the evenings when time allowed, now often with Ben and Emma listening. Brett taught Ben to read the way he had taught Olivia, with patience and encouragement. Emma, fierce and independent even at 3, insisted on learning too, and Olivia marveled at how easily her children gained the education she had fought so hard for. One evening, when Ben was 8 and Emma was 5, Olivia sat at the table working on her writing while Brett helped the children with their letters. She looked up and watched her family, this impossible, beautiful family that had grown from a desperate auction in a dusty Arizona town. Brett caught her watching and smiled. "What are you thinking about?" "About how far we've come," Olivia said softly. "About how my life could have been so different." Brett understood what she meant. "You were brave," he said, "standing on that platform, facing an unknown future with courage. I fell in love with your bravery before I fell in love with anything else." "I fell in love with your kindness," Olivia replied. "With the way you looked at me like I was a person, not property. With the way you offered to teach me to read, as if it was the most natural thing in the world." "Mama, Papa, are you being mushy again?" Ben asked, making a face. Emma giggled. "They're always mushy." "Yes, we are," Brett said, getting up to pull Olivia into his arms. "And someday, when you're older, you'll understand why." More years passed, each one building on the last. They weathered storms, both literal and figurative. They celebrated births and mourned deaths, including the passing of Tommy, the first cowhand Brett had hired, who had become like family. They saw Kennewick grow from a rough mining town into a more established community with a real school, churches, and even a small library. Olivia became known in town not just as Brett Sawyer's wife, but as a woman in her own right. She sold her produce and preserves. She helped at the school when the teacher needed assistance. And she wrote a weekly column for the town newspaper about ranch life that became quite popular. The fact that she had been sold at auction was not forgotten, but it became just part of her story, not the defining feature. When Ben was 15 and Emma 12, Olivia gave birth to their third child, another daughter they named Rose. The pregnancy was unexpected but deeply welcomed. Ben and Emma adored their baby sister, and Rose grew up surrounded by love and attention. Brett was 40 now, with silver threading through his dark hair. Olivia was 35, and sometimes she looked at herself in the mirror and marveled at the changes. The frightened, illiterate girl who had stood on the auction block was gone. In her place was a confident woman who could read and write, who ran a household, raised children, and contributed to her community. One evening, after putting Rose to bed and sending Ben and Emma to do their homework, Olivia and Brett sat on the porch they had built onto the front of the house. The sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold, painting the Arizona landscape in warm light. "You ever regret it?" Olivia asked quietly. "Regret what? Spending $50 on a woman you didn't know?" Brett laughed. "That's the best money I ever spent, though if I'm being honest, I would have paid much more. You were worth every penny and then some." "That's not romantic," Olivia teased. "Comparing me to a business transaction." "All right, let me try again," Brett said, turning to take her hands. "I don't believe in fate, but I believe we were meant to find each other. Maybe not in the way we did, but somehow. You're the other half of my soul, Olivia. You've made my life worth living. The ranch, the success, none of it would mean anything without you." "That's better," Olivia said, leaning over to kiss him. Even after all these years, his kisses still made her heart race. "I love you," Brett said against her lips. "I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "I love you too," Olivia whispered. "More than words can say, though I keep trying to find the right words in my writing." "You'll find them," Brett assured her. "You always do." As they sat together watching the sun disappear below the horizon, Olivia thought about the journey that had brought them here. She thought about fear and courage, about loneliness and love, about the woman who couldn't read and the lonely cowboy who taught her every night. She thought about all the evenings spent at that kitchen table, Brett's patient voice helping her sound out words, his finger tracing letters on worn pages. Those lessons had given her more than literacy. They had given her confidence, opportunity, and a way to connect with the man she loved. In teaching her to read, Brett had given her the tools to write her own story, to shape her own destiny. And what a story it had become. What a beautiful, unexpected, precious story. Inside the house, Olivia could hear Ben helping Emma with her mathematics homework, hear Rose babbling in her crib as she settled down for sleep. These were the sounds of home, of family, of a life built on love and mutual respect. "What are you writing about tonight?" Brett asked. He knew she would write in her journal before bed, as she did every night. "Tonight I think I'll write about beginnings," Olivia said thoughtfully. "About how the worst day of your life can become the first day of your real life, if you're brave enough and lucky enough. About how love can grow in the most unexpected places." "That sounds like a good piece," Brett said, squeezing her hand. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, one by one, in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys. There would be cattle to tend and children to raise, meals to cook and lessons to teach. Ben would need guidance as he grew toward manhood. Emma would need support for her fierce independence, and Rose would need all the love and attention a baby required. But tonight, in this moment, everything was perfect. The ranch was quiet, the children were safe, and Brett and Olivia sat together as they had done countless times before, hands linked, hearts joined. The years continued to pass in the way years do, bringing changes both small and large. Ben grew into a fine young man who worked the ranch alongside his father. At 18, he fell in love with the schoolteacher's daughter, a sweet girl named Clara, and they married in a ceremony much more traditional than his parents had been. Olivia cried throughout the wedding, remembering her own hasty vows in front of that uncomfortable reverend. Emma proved to be as fierce as everyone had expected. At 16, she announced she wanted to go to the new teaching college in Tucson. Brett was hesitant about his daughter leaving home, but Olivia supported her, understanding the hunger for knowledge and opportunity. They sent Emma off with their blessing and enough money to see her through, and she wrote them long letters about her studies. Rose grew into a gentle soul who loved animals and spent hours caring for injured birds and orphaned baby animals she found around the ranch. She reminded Olivia of Brett, with his quiet kindness and deep well of compassion. When Olivia was 42 and Brett 47, they became grandparents. Ben and Clara had a son they named Brett Thomas, and Olivia discovered that being a grandmother was even more wonderful than being a mother. She could love little Brett without the constant worry that came with raising your own children. The ranch continued to prosper. Brett took on a partner, a young rancher named Samuel who bought half the operation and ran it alongside Brett and Ben. This allowed Brett to slow down a bit, to spend more time at the house with Olivia and Rose. On their 20th anniversary, Brett took Olivia back to Kennewick. The town had grown substantially, barely recognizable as the rough mining town where they had met. The spot where the auction had taken place was now a small park with a fountain. "I wanted to bring you here," Brett said as they stood looking at the fountain, "to remember where we started." "We've come a long way from here," Olivia said, leaning against her husband. "We have. But I wouldn't change a single thing. Every moment, good and bad, led us here, led us to now." They walked through town, stopping at the library that had been built 5 years earlier. Olivia had donated money to help with its construction, wanting other people to have access to books and learning. Inside, they found Olivia's favorite corner where she often came to read or write. "I never thanked you properly," Olivia said suddenly. "For what?" Brett asked, though he probably knew. "For seeing me as more than what I was. For looking at an illiterate woman at an auction and seeing someone worth teaching, worth courting, worth loving." "I saw you," Brett said simply. "Just you. And that was enough. That was everything." That evening, back at the ranch, Olivia opened her journal to a fresh page. She had filled dozens of journals over the years, documenting their life in careful script that had grown more confident and beautiful with practice. She thought about what to write, about how to capture 20 years of love and life and learning. Finally, she began to write. "Today, Brett took me back to the place where we met, where my old life ended and my new life began. I stood on that platform 20 years ago, frightened and alone, unable to read the signs around me or the contracts I was signing. But I could read the kindness in one man's blue eyes. I could read the promise in his gentle voice. And that was the beginning of learning to read all the beautiful things life had to offer. Brett taught me letters and words and sentences. He taught me that I was worthy of education, of respect, of love. In learning to read, I learned to hope. In learning to write, I learned to dream. And in learning to love him, I learned who I really was. If I could go back and speak to that scared girl on the platform, I would tell her that everything is going to be all right, better than all right. I would tell her about the ranch and the children and the grandchildren. I would tell her about summer evenings on the porch and winter nights by the fire. I would tell her about a love that grows deeper with every passing year. But I cannot go back. I can only go forward, hand in hand with the man who saw something in me worth saving. The cowboy who taught me to read, and in doing so, taught me to live. Olivia set down her pen and looked out the window where Brett was walking back from the barn, Rose skipping alongside him. She saw Ben in the distance, working with the horses, probably thinking about getting home to Clara and their son. She imagined Emma in Tucson, studying hard and writing her next letter home. This was her life. This beautiful, full, unexpected life that had grown from ashes and auctions into something solid and true. She had been sold, yes, but she had been found too. Found by a good man who taught her to read, who loved her without reservation, who built a life and a family with her. The door opened and Brett came in, Rose chattering about a new calf that had been born. He caught Olivia's eye over their daughter's head and smiled, that same warm smile that had drawn her to him 20 years ago. "I love you," Olivia mouthed. "I love you too," Brett mouthed back. And in that simple exchange, in that worn kitchen where Brett had once taught her the alphabet by lamplight, Olivia felt the deep, abiding contentment of a life well lived. A life written one day at a time, one lesson at a time, one moment of love at a time. She had learned to read words on a page, but Brett had taught her to read the language of love, of commitment, of family. That was the greatest literacy of all, and she would spend the rest of her days grateful for the cowboy who had seen her worth and taught her to see it too. The sun set over the Arizona landscape, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Inside the ranch house, the Sawyer family gathered for dinner, their voices mingling in laughter and conversation. And Olivia, who had once been unable to read her own name, sat at the head of the table beside her husband, surrounded by the living proof that love and learning could transform everything. Years later, when Olivia was 60 and Brett 65, they sat together on that same porch, now worn smooth by decades of use. Their children were grown with families of their own. Ben ran the ranch with his son, now old enough to help. Emma had returned from Tucson as a teacher and opened a school in Kennewick, where she taught reading and writing to anyone who wanted to learn, regardless of their ability to pay. Rose had married a veterinarian and they lived in town, where Rose assisted her husband in caring for animals. Olivia and Brett had 7 grandchildren now, with another on the way. The ranch house, expanded multiple times over the years, was often full of noise and laughter as the family gathered for Sunday dinners and holidays. On this particular evening, it was just the two of them, enjoying the quiet after a busy day of grandchildren visiting. Brett's hair was fully gray now, and Olivia's auburn had faded to a soft russet threaded with silver. But when she looked at him, she still saw the tall cowboy with blue eyes who had bid $50 for a future with her. "Read to me," Brett asked, as he often did these days. His eyesight was failing, though he refused to admit it, and Olivia had taken over the reading. Olivia picked up the book they were working through, a novel about the Civil War that Brett found fascinating. She read aloud, her voice strong and clear, pronouncing every word with confidence. It never ceased to amaze her, the fact that she could read anything now. She had consumed hundreds of books over the years, each one a gift, each one expanding her understanding of the world. When she finished the chapter, Brett sighed contentedly. "You read beautifully," he said. "You always have." "I had a good teacher," Olivia replied, as she always did. "You were a good student," Brett countered, "determined and brave." They fell into comfortable silence, watching the sunset. It was their favorite time of day, when the work was done and they could simply be together. "You remember that first night?" Brett asked eventually. "When I showed you the alphabet and you could barely sit still because you were so nervous." "I remember," Olivia said. I thought I was too old to learn, that my brain couldn't do it. But you did it, Brett said proudly. You learned to read and then to write, and now our daughter teaches others to do the same. You started something, Olivia. A legacy. Olivia thought about that. Emma had told her that several of her students were women like Olivia had been, women who had never had the chance to learn. Emma taught them with patience and encouragement, the same way Brett had taught Olivia. And those women went on to teach their own children, breaking the cycle of illiteracy. We started it together, Olivia corrected. You were willing to see past what I couldn't do and focus on what I could learn. I could not teach you, Brett said. You wanted it so much, and I wanted to give you everything you desired. They sat until the stars came out, until the air grew cool and they finally moved inside. Olivia helped Brett to bed, for he tired easily these days. She tucked the quilts around him, the same patchwork quilt that had been on the bed the first night she came to the ranch, now threadbare in places but too precious to replace. Stay with me, Brett said, catching her hand. Always, Olivia promised, climbing in beside him. They lay together in the darkness, hands clasped, hearts beating in sync after 40 years of marriage. Brett's breathing slowed and deepened as he drifted off to sleep, but Olivia stayed awake a while longer, thinking about everything they had built together. She thought about the girl she had been and the woman she had become. She thought about her children and grandchildren, about the ranch that had started with 300 acres and 50 head of cattle and had grown into a thriving operation. She thought about her shelves of journals, 40 years of memories and thoughts and feelings preserved in her own handwriting. Most of all, she thought about love, about the unexpected, transformative power of being truly seen and valued by another person. Brett had given her that gift on the day he bid for her at the auction, and he had continued giving it every day since. She thought about all the women who had stood on that platform with her, wondered where they had ended up, hoped they had found happiness too. She thought about all the auctions that had happened before and since, about the desperation that drove women to such measures, about the men who saw opportunities for labor or companionship in those sales. But she also thought about love that could grow even in difficult soil, about second chances and new beginnings, about the power of education to change lives, about families built on respect and affection rather than just legal contracts. As she drifted toward sleep, Olivia whispered a prayer of gratitude for this life, for this man, for every moment of joy and even the sorrows that had made the joy sweeter. She was thankful for learning to read, but even more thankful for learning to love and be loved. The next morning, Olivia woke to find Brett watching her with a soft smile. "Good morning, beautiful," he said. "Good morning," she replied, reaching out to touch his weathered face. "How are you feeling?" "Perfect," Brett said. "I'm lying here with my wife. The sun is shining, and I can hear the ranch coming to life outside. What more could a man want?" They rose and began their day, moving through the familiar routines of a lifetime together. Olivia made breakfast while Brett did small chores around the yard, no longer able to do the heavy ranch work but still needing to feel useful. Ben stopped by to discuss business and stayed for coffee. Emma rode out with her husband and their 2 children, bringing fresh bread and news from town. At lunch, Rose arrived with a basket of supplies and worried eyes, checking on her parents as she did most days. The grandchildren ran around the yard, their laughter filling the air. Brett sat in his rocking chair on the porch, holding the youngest grandchild in his arms and telling stories about the old days. Olivia watched from the doorway, her heart full to bursting. This was what they had built together. Not just a ranch or a family, but a legacy of love and learning, of hard work and dedication, of seeing the best in people and helping them become their best selves. As the years continued to pass, Brett's health declined gradually. He never complained, but Olivia could see him slowing down, could see the effort it took him to do simple tasks. She stayed by his side, caring for him as tenderly as he had cared for her throughout their marriage. One evening, when Brett was 70 and Olivia 65, they sat together in their bedroom. Brett was propped up against pillows, too weak to get up, but his blue eyes were as bright as ever when they looked at her. "Read to me," he asked, as he did every evening now. Olivia picked up her favorite book of poetry, the one Brett had bought her all those years ago in Kennewick. The pages were soft with age and handling. She read poem after poem, her voice filling the quiet room. When she finished, Brett reached for her hand. "Thank you," he said softly. "For everything. For 45 years of being the best wife a man could ask for giving me children and grandchildren, for building this life with me, for being brave enough to learn and grow and change, for loving me." "Thank you for seeing me," Olivia said, tears streaming down her face. "For looking at a scared girl at an auction and seeing someone worth saving, for teaching me to read and write, for loving me when I didn't even know how to love myself, for giving me this beautiful life." "It was my honor," Brett said. "Every single day it was my honor." They sat together late into the night, talking about their life, their children, their memories. Brett told her where important papers were kept and made her promise to stay at the ranch, to let Ben and Emma help her, to not be alone. "I'll never be alone," Olivia said. "You filled my life with so many people who love me, and you'll always be in my heart." As dawn broke, with Olivia holding his hand and their children gathered around the bed, Brett Sawyer took his last breath. He went peacefully, surrounded by the family he had built and the woman he had loved for 45 years. Olivia grieved deeply. After more than 4 decades of partnership, the loss left a hole in her life that nothing could fill. But she was not alone. Her children rallied around her, her grandchildren kept her busy, and the ranch continued to operate. She found comfort in her writing. Every evening, she sat at the old kitchen table and wrote in her journal, processing her grief and celebrating the love she had known. She wrote about Brett's kindness, his patience, his unwavering support. She wrote about the life they had built together, about the legacy they were leaving behind. Emma, seeing her mother's beautiful writing, suggested compiling her journals into a book. "Other people should read this," Emma said. "Your story, yours and Papa's, it could give hope to people." Olivia was hesitant at first, but eventually agreed. With Emma's help, she edited and compiled her journals into a memoir. They called it Taught to Read, Taught to Love, a story of the Arizona frontier. The book was published when Olivia was 68, printed by a small press in Tucson. It told the story of the auction, of Brett's bid, of learning to read by lamplight, of falling in love, of building a ranch and raising a family. It was honest about the desperation and injustice that led to such auctions, but also about the love that could bloom even in difficult circumstances. The book found a small but dedicated readership, particularly among women. Olivia received letters from women all over the territory and beyond, thanking her for her story, sharing their own stories of struggle and triumph. Some letters came from women who were learning to read for the first time, and Olivia answered every single one, encouraging them in their efforts. Olivia lived for 15 years after Brett's death, dying peacefully in her sleep at the age of 80. In those years, she saw 2 more grandchildren born, saw Ben's son take over most of the ranch operations, saw Emma become a prominent educator in Arizona, and saw Rose's veterinary practice grow into a successful business. When Olivia died, the whole town of Kennewick came to her funeral. The preacher spoke about her life and her impact, about the woman who had arrived in town, unable to read and left having taught countless others. Emma read from her mother's memoir, her voice steady despite her tears. Ben spoke about his parents' love and the example they had set. Rose simply said, "She taught us all to be brave." They buried Olivia next to Brett on a hillside overlooking the ranch. The headstone read, "Olivia Thompson Sawyer, beloved wife, mother, grandmother. She learned to read, she learned to love, she learned to live." The ranch continued to prosper, passed down through generations of Sawyers. Emma's school continued to operate, eventually becoming part of the public school system, but always maintaining its commitment to teaching anyone who wanted to learn, regardless of age or background. Rose's children became veterinarians, continuing their mother's work. Olivia's memoir was republished several times over the years, finding new audiences in each generation. It became required reading in many Arizona schools, a testament to one woman's courage and one man's compassion, to the transformative power of education and love. But perhaps the greatest legacy was simpler than books or businesses or schools. It was in the love that had been passed down through the family, in the values of respect and education and hard work. It was in the way Brett and Olivia's descendants treated each other and the people around them. It was in the belief that every person had worth and potential, that it was never too late to learn, that love could conquer fear and transform lives. The story of the auction that held a woman who could not read and the lonely cowboy who taught her every night became a part of Arizona folklore, embellished and romanticized over time. But at its heart, it remained a simple, true story about two people who found each other in desperate circumstances and built something beautiful together. It was a story about seeing and being seen, about teaching and learning, about courage and compassion. Most of all, it was a story about love, the kind of love that transforms and endures, that builds and sustains, that gives meaning to life and leaves a legacy that echoes through generations. And somewhere, in the journals carefully preserved by the family, in the schoolhouse that still bore Emma's name, in the ranch that still operated on land Brett had claimed over a century before, the story lived on, reminding new generations that love and learning can change everything, that desperate beginnings can lead to beautiful endings, and that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places.